Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with really two titans of the U.S.-ROK relationship. Chairman Ryu and Ambassador Yoon have done so much to build the relationship and the alliance to where it is today. So I think are the perfect two people to talk about where the relationship is going. So before we go toward the future, I'd like to turn to Chairman Ryu and then Ambassador to talk about the summit that just took place August 25th, to lay out where we're at right now. So, Chairman, over to you.
Well, I think today marks the 100th day of President Lee in his office. It almost feels like 1 year, to be honest with you. So for 6 months, we didn't have a president, and I think the business community did our best try to keep the link. And when President Lee came in office, things kind of settled down. And finally, the summit took place with a lot of worries and all that. But I think he did quite well with the president. I think we had a very good business roundtable. So I think they had. But in the midst of that, we had. The Georgia incident happened, so I may want to talk about that because people are worried about, what is America doing? And we are allies. How can you handcuff people? But I think my guess is I don't think President Trump probably knew about, what was happening. I think he would have much done it in a low profile if he had to do that. But on the other hand, I also feel understand the American point because, you can have 20, 30 workers that you need. But 400 people in the factory. We are one of the first American investment from Korea. We built our plant in Cedar Rapids in 1992, and at the peak, of course, we had difficulty because we didn't have any workers. But at most, we had 25, maybe not even 30, and they were there to teach people, teach the workers how to do things. But when you're having 400 people, you're not there to try to teach. You're there to basically do the work, right? So I think we made a mistake on that, and then I think this also happens when all the Korean plants are located in the South, Georgia, Alabama. I always told my Korean business friends that you got to spread your power there. The most important is not the capital in Washington, but it's the capital of all the different states. So why not try to expand all your people there? So. I think you have to look at both sides rather than just blaming the Americans on everything. Of course, it was wrong for them to handcuff. We're not drug dealers or anything. But on the other hand, we have to understand that we need to do something. And this visa issue should have been taken care of a long time ago in the previous administrations. When you're investing that kind of money, there is a leverage that, okay, we won't invest unless you give us some visa. So there got to be some give and take. But I think because we have two different presidents, over the few years. Some went to jail, and I think we didn't think how important this visa issue was, but now we understand why, these things are so important. So now, going back to the president visit, I hear, when I was there, I took a business delegation of 15 people, and this is very difficult because we were doing it together with the American business people, and this was a week before Labor Day vacation, and Labor Day goes abroad or they don't come to work. So we were very afraid that we may not get a real top business people, but we were very successful. In fact, we had more people than we needed. Jensen Huang from NVIDIA came. David Rubenstein also came. He gave a Baltimore Orioles uniform to our president. As you know, he's the owner of the Orioles. So all went well, and we were worried about President Lee's summit for the first time with Trump, but we were kind of worried because the meeting was supposed to start at 10:30, and then it went to start at 12 o'clock. But there's one thing, when you have a summit with President Trump, there's a White House gift shop. And if the president takes the guests to the White House gift shop, it's a successful meeting. If it's not, he just says goodbye and go home. But so the meeting lasted more than an hour longer. So us business people, we had to wait about 2 hours for President Lee to come back. So that was very successful. And then in the business roundtable, we had a good meeting. a lot of people, we're ready to invest. So I think it's a good start. We just have to deliver now, and it's got to be a win-win situation for both sides, not one-sided. At the moment, it looked a little bit too much tilted for the Americans, but I think we need to kind of move it sort of through the middle so that everybody understands that yes, it is a great alliance, and that we need to get this done. So that's my point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's a great laydown of the economic diplomacy that went into the summit and a snapshot of where we're at in this time of transition with a lot of opportunities but a lot of challenges. I'd like to turn to the Ambassador to maybe talk a little bit about the success of the visit from the government perspective. Was it just the gift shop or was there more?
Well, thank you very much, Henry, and great to be with you and with Eugene, Chairman Eugene. I've known both of them for a long time. I worked with Henry actually when my first assignment in Korea, 25 years ago. So it's been a while. Let me address your question, dividing them up. Where are we in the relationship? And how about this issue regarding visas in Georgia? So where are we? I think Chairman Eugene is completely right. There has been a big change, both in Korea and in the United States. I arrived here in early January, and I arrived here mostly because there had been a martial law declaration. The government, as Chairman said, was non-existent, and so Washington was very worried for a long time. But actually, things worked out. In Korea, rule of law stuck, there was an election, and of course, new government. And with the new government here and new administration in Washington, I would say my real work started after the June 3 election, and that's when we began talking about how do we get two leaders together. I would say I would like to highlight three aspects of the summit meeting. One is the personal connection the two leaders made. I really thought the meeting, it was over an hour long, in front of camera, was natural. The two connected, both substantively and personally. I think anytime you have two leaders connect earlier on, I think you can say they have a relationship which will last to lower levels like me. And on substance, I want to highlight two items. One is alliance. There was strong commitment by both leaders that alliance must be maintained, including the troop levels. Remember, there was a lot of discussion beforehand. Will the Americans reduce troops and so on? And also, number two, it must be modernized. And in context of modernization, we are beginning discussions. What does it mean to modernize this alliance? Is it right to only have, say, North Korea, to have US troops in South Korea look at just North Korea? Or should we look at threats in Indo-Pacific in general? So they kicked off, I would say, modernization of alliance. And we can get into more in-depth detail what that means. Second item, of course, they discuss is tariffs. Tariffs, what do we do about them? How do we organize tariff structure? How do we organize investments? Now, we must remember the root cause of why the United States has tariffs. That is the trade deficit. U.S. trade deficit is what now? About $1.1, $1.2 trillion. It's easy to say trillion dollars, but this is a huge amount of money. 1.1 or 2 trillion dollars is about, I would say, 60, 70% of South Korean GDP. These are not sustainable. U.S. cannot continue to run trade deficits of this size. So the tariffs are there, investments are there, so that at the end of the day, our trade deficit is reduced to sustainable levels. So those two aspects, kicking off the modernization, trying to make much more progress on tariff issues, investment issues, I would say are the two substantive results of the summit. Finally, let me talk a little bit about what Chairman Eugene raised, which is what is happening in Georgia. I just heard this morning, and I'm sure many of you know, that the release from the detention of about 300 or so Koreans have been delayed, and I think they will be released sometime in the afternoon our time. They will be moved from, they are now near Savannah, Georgia, to the waiting plane in Atlanta. So I think the whole thing's been delayed by about 12 hours, maybe 16 hours. I fully expect this will happen, and I think this is a good thing. I was very concerned about what will happen, and of course I've been talking quite a lot with the Korean side on how it should happen. And I think, again, we can get into more discussions, why it happened, how it happened, how do we make sure in the future these are minimized. The goal should be number one, U.S. must encourage investment, whether from Korea or elsewhere, and Korea is becoming increasingly big, I would say, promoter of investment in the U.S. Number two, how do we uphold immigration, entry regulations? How do we adjust them to meet these challenges? Thank you.
Thanks very much for that great perspective on the summit. Lot of issues that you both have raised. I'd like to maybe focus on one sector to kind of pull out some of the themes that we've addressed already. I think it's of shipbuilding, because I think it's both gets at some of the investment issues, as the future of the relationship, as well as some of the defense modernization issues. So I guess first on the economic diplomacy side, Chairman, how do you see the Make American Shipping Great Again investment plan that was talked about at the summit? How do you see that playing out with Korea's shipping companies investing and having a greater relationship with the United States?
Well, for shipbuilding, I mean, there has to be a substantial amount of investment, and also Korean coming into the U.S., and of course the visa issue is also going to be another problem. But I haven't built big ships, but then there's regulations in the U.S. that it has to be made in the U.S., so they have to change some of the regulation and the rules. And I think the U.S. also have a big presence now, I think, in Subic Bay in Philippines. So, the ships doesn't necessarily have to be made in the U.S. It could be made in the Philippines, it could be made in Korea, or some part of it could be made in Korea and then exported to the U.S. and do the final assembly in the U.S. So there's many ways to do things. So I think those are the issues that we need to work with. And the money is, we have plenty of investment, all that's coming to the U.S. So capital and money won't be an issue, but it will just, the challenge will be how to match, how much of the workers we need, what we need to do, how to divide, the productivity and the manufacturing in different continents. So I think those are the challenges. But I think there's everything there to create a solution. So I'm not too worried about it. I think it may take time, but I think there's always a way to,
Great. I
find it,
appreciate that optimistic view. Ambassador Yoon, how does this economic conversation topic that Chairman raised, how does it fit into the competition with China? With China making over 50% of the ships, with the United States making only 1%, how can this cooperation help develop the United States shipbuilding sector and work in the greater competition with China?
Well, thank you very much. I think we need to look shipping in a larger context. I think you can divide it into essentially what the U.S. Navy needs, and then also what the private sector for freight needs. Of course, being in the government, I'm much more concerned with how do we meet the public sector need, that's the U.S. Navy need. And it is clear that U.S. Navy really needs to modernize every aspect of shipbuilding, and ranging from transportation ships to frigates. All those things are needed, and really there are two aspects of that. One is, as the chairman mentioned, how do we build ships in the U.S.? And there are regulations governing ships, Jones Act and other act. And then, can we do those in Korea? So I went to Ulsan Hyundai Shipyard only about a few weeks ago, and I was tremendously impressed at the modernization and also rapidity. For example, Ulsan Shipyard can produce 50, 60 ships a year. It typically takes 2 or 3 years to build a big ship, including things like warships, and they were building some of them. So it's clear that we need to tap into technology, skilled labor of those shipyards. And so the first place we're thinking of, for example, as Hanwha did, is there capability, is there interest among shipyards, among shipbuilders in Korea to buy, for example, shipyards in America? This would be a direct investment, and modernize them. I mean, that's one way to do it, Second way to do it is, can we make American regulation a little bit accommodating so that ships can be built, as the chairman mentions, in places like Korea, Philippines, and so on. And then the last thing I want to mention is significant, is what we call maintenance and repair operations. And those things can be done outside, and already in Hanwha Shipyard and others in Korea, they are doing maintenance and repair on those ships, but we want to make that bigger. And so I think shipyard, and I want to say along with other sectors, like chips, like civilian nuclear, is really the area that I can both bring up and further develop Korean side, while also doing so in the United States as well. So as I look at the investment area, shipyard is one of them we need to focus on. And what I would like to see in both governments is really a center point for coordination on these items, so these things get moving. Governments are notoriously slow in some of these things, so we need to get moving on those. Thank you, Henry.
I appreciate that, and just laying out how we could work together to address some of these long-term challenges. Because, as you mentioned, these shipyards and civil nuclear, these are decades-long economic relationships that need to get started and to move forward. So you mentioned, Joe, Ambassador, about the alliance, the modernization alliance. You talked about the naval ships just now. I'd like to go into that a little bit more and talk about the modernization alliance. How do you see that? You touched on it in your opening. Could you go into a little more about how you see the alliance modernizing? You mentioned the troops here could have a different focus, but more broadly speaking, what does a modern alliance look like?
I think modern alliance really has two components. One is certainly financial side. And I think there is a widespread recognition in U.S. as well as among our allies that really burden sharing, defense cost sharing must be shared more equitably. So we are asking all our allies, whether it's NATO, Japan, Korea, or others, please spend more on defense. So for example, South Korea spends about 2.4% of GDP. We would like to see that come up to about 3.5% and beyond that. So these are the exact same demand we are making on our allies. So that's the financial aspect. Modernization aspect has a number of factors. what does U.S. force posture look like? You know, should it be, as it has been so far, all oriented towards North Korea? Should it be also oriented to other possible threats within Indo-Pacific? So there's a force posture issue in general. Second is then in that case, if we have this different posture, do we need different capabilities? And I think the capability is a big factor in that. And then lastly, we've always talked about it, and it's been, we planned it many times. For example, one item is wartime operation control. We have agreed on a path to wartime operation control so that this, we call it OPCON, should be handed to the Korean side. When do we do it? How do we do it? It's been an issue for as far as, we've been here together. And so that's going to be issue. But as you know, these alliance issues are deeply political. And, we now had a change in government here, change in administration here. So they will bring their own political perspective. And so as someone who's worked on it, we also have to adjust to those political demands as well. Thank you.
That's a great explanation of the political aspects of a modernized alliance and modernized relationship. Chairman, could you explain what a modern economic alliance and security relationship looks like? Korea is a growing exporter of defense articles and defense equipment. What does it look like going forward with the United States and Korea working together economically to make a more modern alliance?
Well, before I ask your question, I want to thank Ambassador Joseph Yun because he's done a great job. Because I know how difficult it is to work for the Trump administration because I've dealt with him recently. But it is difficult, and for him to do that every hour of the day, and then having our workers coming back to Korea, I think he deserves a lot of credit. Maybe a big hand for our ambassador here because I know how tough that job. I'm glad I'm not in this position. But going to your question, we have, let's say, 350 billion that sort of put for the U.S. I think there's a lot of infrastructure that's weak in the U.S. Bridges, train stations, like New York. So many, all the buildings are old. So I think we could be very helpful in those infrastructures. And the infrastructure projects are, the finance is guaranteed by U.S. government. So there's no worry about losing that fund. You could actually make some money on it. So I think if you pick the right, investment or the right projects, I think there's a good chance of being a win-win situation. We got the semiconductors, and already the good thing is already the Korean companies are already established. Automobile, battery, semiconductor. So to make additional investment there for the future, I think it's a very attractive deal for Korea too. So we're worried about, boy, how can we invest all that money and all that? But I think if we handpick the ones that we think we will be successful, I think it could be a win-win situation for both sides.
I like the win-win slogan is a good one. I think it's great to look for that. Looking at another win-win-win situation, I'd like to turn to the Trilateral Alliance. Coming up in October, Senator Haggerty will lead a group to, which I imagine you'll be there in Tokyo, to develop the economic side of the trilateral cooperation pillar. Could you tell us about how you see the trilateral cooperation going forward?
Well, see, President Lee visited Japan first. Of course, the Prime Minister resigned since then, so now he's got to deal with a new Prime Minister. But this all started with Senator Haggerty about 2 years ago. So there is always the basis of a trilateral, and President Lee has been very positive about that we need to have a good relationship with Japan, despite the historical past we have. We share the same front lawn. And then President, of course, Trump mentioned about what took you guys so long to get together. So I think we're going in the right direction. Of course, it's going to be interesting who's going to be the next Prime Minister of Japan. It's going to be a little more hardline. So hopefully they'll but I don't think picking whoever becomes the next prime minister, I don't think will make too much of an impact. I think the trilateral alliance is so important, and with President Trump being in the lead and our President Lee sort of knowing the importance of, I think the good days are ahead of us in the trial, and then we'll work very hard together, and then we'll have that trilateral meeting in Japan, and I think that would also be a very good opportunity to stress the importance of our trilateral relationship.
Thank
Alliance.
you. Thanks for that. Ambassador, just this week, the Japanese defense minister came to the defense forum for the first time in 10 years. Is this a sign of greater bilateral and potentially trilateral cooperation in the security realm? What does that look like, both for North Korea, as you talked about, but also in the modern alliance structure, looking at the threats from the Indo-Pacific?
I think one of the really big story to me anyhow, having worked in the region for a long time, is the emerging relationship between South Korea and Japan. That has changed fundamentally since we've been here, for the past 20 years. I mean, I find that, working in the government responds to what the public wants. It may take time, but they respond, okay? And I think there is a really huge support in South Korean public for better relations with Japan. People look at it, maybe it's a younger generation coming up, and people like Chairman and me getting older, so I think I really do feel that. I feel that both with Japan and even with United States. You and I were here, 2007, and we would walk out of the embassy every day. There would be daily protests of all things, people not wanting to eat American beef. And it was, for Henry, very confusing, why are they protesting every day? They don't want to eat beef. Now I walk out of the embassy and there are no protests. And, on Saturdays, there are older folks waving American flags, and so these are changes in public opinion, and which is why we were able to have a good summit meeting, because that's what the public wants. Similarly, I do believe public wants better trilateral relationship between U.S., Japan, and Korea, and that is happening, as the chairman said, and as you said. Now, every coin has two sides. And the other side is, of course, in that time, North Korea has also become a player. I would say, even a geographic player. I mean, it was only a few years ago we used to think North Korea as an isolated pariah state. But I mean, last week you saw pictures of Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, and Putin, three of them, and all the rest behind them. There's no question that they wanted to highlight their relationship as well. So that's a challenge we have to deal with. And I'm not sure where we go from here in terms of that relationship, but clearly one answer is our trilateral relationship. And so, but again, how do we manage that competition? How do we manage it from not spilling over and becoming, threatening? I think that is going to be the challenge we'll have to face.
Thanks for that. Before we turn to the audience for questions, just one question looking to the future for you two. Joe, we talked about shipbuilding, mentioned civil nuclear. Could you just talk about what you see as a future sector for more cooperation going forward, either from the investment or just in general, that could drive the relationship, the economic relationship, to a more prosperous future, whether it's AI or quantum or otherwise? Joe?
So I do think cooperation between United States and Korea has been instrumental in development of both nations. I mean, here in Korea, you see the technology sector, whether it's cell phones, chips, and so on, benefiting. I also do think that even cultural products, K-culture, K-pop, had a lot to do with working together. I mean, look at the influence of Netflix, for example, U.S. investment here in Netflix in bringing up and globalizing Korean cultural output. I think that's all been important. And now we need to look at other sectors in Korea that can come up as well. And certainly shipbuilding is one. And I would say AI is the other. I mean, I would love to see AI develop in Korea along the similar platform as the US so that, again, we become together global players in AI. I think that's going to be really a big one coming up. And the other one you mentioned is civilian nuclear. There was a landmark agreement between two governments in January on how to cooperate, because essentially a lot of technology for big reactors in South Korea uses what was originally combustion engineering and then Westinghouse technology. So how to share that technology, I think, is now paving the way to build reactors. I mean, these are literally tens of billions of dollars at stake, whether it's in Saudi Arabia, whether it's in Czech Republic, UAE, and there are a lot of other markets. And the second one that is similar is what we call SMRs, small modulated reactors. And that is an opportunity to really provide and become the engine of power for data centers and so on. And we're looking at doing things in America, getting Korean companies to come in, build SMRs in America. So I think that's also a huge sector that we can work together.
Lots of great potential you've laid out. Chairman?
I totally agree with the ambassador what he said. I think we could sort of expand our cooperation, not just the manufacturing, but like K-culture, K-food. And talking about our relationship with Japan, it wasn't the politicians who made us closer. It was the Japanese women, young and old, that really created, the real closeness. And then, of course, our politicians had to follow that. If everybody had such a good culture, why can't we do it? I think same could happen in the States. Like, we're going to invest a lot of money, but look at New York. It's really deteriorating. That's where President Trump is from. So I think there's a project of trying to improve the Grand Central Station and then put in a new, maybe even link that with the Koreatown, build a Korea Tower. So Korea has an opportunity to, if they decide to agree on it, to be sort of the center in the greatest city in the world. Then you can develop a building, you can develop the Grand Central, along with the new Madison Square Garden. They're trying to move that and build one. So if we can somehow find a way to invest in that project, it would be a great opportunity to put Korea in the map of New York City. And we could also improve the train system. Right now, the Acela takes about almost 3 hours, but putting on New Korea there, we could get there wise to New York in less than 2 hours. Then why use the airplane, you can just take the plane. So I think it's a train. So I think there's so many ways to improve the infrastructure, and not just on manufacturing, but on the cultural things, as well as building up new cities.
That's great. So we have the people who want it, the symbols, the culture that drive it, and then all these great future industries. A lot of potential. Well, thanks very much for that. Before we turn to questions, just a quick round of applause for our two panelists before we get to your questions. So thanks for that.